couple watches live over a webcam as a man breaks into their home.
Like, you want to go in, you want to see, and there's part of you that is itching for a confrontation.
Your house should be the one place that you have the most control over.
And this serial burglar is out to terrorize an entire neighborhood.
Different homeowner just a few miles away says the same man also burglarized his home.
So he kind of went on like this mini crime spree.
Coming up later.
She walks up and she just starts firing repeatedly into this house. And I'm like, what in the world is going on?
Who is she? And why is she so hell-bent on causing destruction?
She is dead set on getting rid of whoever's in that house or burning that house down, period.
What could happen to a person that would make them want to do such a thing?
It's June 6th, 2016. When this quiet home in Austin, Texas becomes the latest addition to the more than 1 million homes burglarized every year in the United States.
He was captured on camera walking from room to room, speeding up as the alarm system kicked on.
We see the burglar going about his business pretty much unfazed by the fact that their alarm is going off, and didn't seem to be particularly bothered, certainly by household pets. He is on a mission to get whatever stuff he can and get the heck out of there.
If you didn't know the context of the video, you would think this is this guy's house. He's looking for something, he lost his keys. He just seems so at ease and so comfortable.
With the children in daycare and their parents at work, no one is home but the family dog to watch as the audacious intruder rifles through drawers and countertops before finally making his getaway with pockets full of stolen goods.
He's not fussing around. He's looking for small, valuable objects. He's not gonna get caught with a TV in his hand. He's very strategic with how he's stealing.
The invasion of a family's most personal space is traumatizing.
Home is where you're safe. It's where your children go to bed. So the thought of this stranger rummaging through your bedroom is extremely alarming.
People feel a sense of that they've been violated with a crime like this. As a matter of fact, there's some people who wind up moving from their homes because they just can't get over the fact that someone's been in their house.
And for homeowners Megan and Nathan Zellner, the break-in is especially painful.
Our son was born in that house, and so it's a very special place.
You feel that violation, but you also feel that lack of control. Like, your house should be the one place that you have the most control over.
It's an experience made all the more traumatic as the Zellners watch it unfold in real time on their security camera's cell phone app.
Megan calls me up and she said that the alarm company called and the back door had tripped off. And I pulled up my phone and it had the camera web app on it, and here the alarm going off, and sure enough, there's a guy walking around in our kitchen. And it was like, you have that sense of dread of like, oh no, somebody's in my house. Could see him go over and try to fiddle with the code as if he could somehow turn it off. And then he disappears for about a minute, almost 2 minutes down the hallway, and reappears. I was really worried that my computer would be stolen.
As their alarm company alerts the police, the Zellners race home. Nathan is more than 20 minutes away, but Megan is right around the corner.
As soon as I saw the alarm company calling, I'm already grabbing my purse and my keys to leave. And so within probably 3 or 4 minutes, I pulled up. I didn't want to park right outside in case there was someone there. So I parked down the street and waited. And, my adrenaline was just pumping. Like, you want to go in, you want to see, and there's part of you that is itching for a confrontation at that point. I thought for sure I would see a car or somebody leaving the house. And I sat there for what felt like an eternity.
From her spot down the street, there's no way for Megan to know if the burglar is still inside or how dangerous he might be.
Who knows what he has on him? Who knows if he has like a weapon? And what if someone walked in on him? He could have, retaliated.
The minutes tick away as Megan waits for the police. And once they arrive, what the Zellners learn about this burglar will send a ripple of terror through their entire community. As a midday burglary is underway at her North Austin home, Megan Zellner waits anxiously for the police just down the street from her front door.
You don't want to go into your house as much as your instincts may be telling you to do that, but for someone knowing that someone's in your house who doesn't belong there, it's going to feel like forever.
Minutes later, the police and Megan's husband, Nathan, both arrive at the scene. The officers conduct a sweep of the property, but the thief has already taken off.
He had long gone by that point, so we were able to assess.
When the police and Megan and I went into the backyard, the back door, like the frame was all shattered, the wood was all broke. There's just something about seeing your house in that condition that was just like, oh, this is pretty sad.
He went to where he thought he could get the most bang for his buck. And so he went through our top dresser drawers. And I had a jewelry roll in one of those top drawers, mostly costume jewelry from each of my grandmothers. And then he did grab my watch, but I think that's it. He was in and out very quickly.
But the Zellners aren't going to take this theft lying down.
We had the video and we sent that to the detective. And what we did that evening was post the video online. And there was instant feedback. People started connecting some dots.
As the Zellners' video spreads on social media and through the local news, more photos and more stories come to light, connecting this shameless thief to at least 2 other home invasions over the last month.
Different homeowner just a few miles away says the same man also burglarized his home.
He broke into a house down near San Antonio and was kind of working his way up I-35. Then somebody had posted that earlier in the same day, they confronted an individual coming out from the backyard of their house.
And I said, you know, what are you doing at my house? And he goes, somebody was crying in your yard and the dog was barking. And of course I called BS on that and he got really mad.
It was a real confrontation that started getting a shouting match, and the guy who came out of the backyard got in his truck and tried to run him over or backed out of the driveway really fast.
At this point, the upset burglar jumped into his white SUV, rammed it into Bugmaster's truck, and peeled out of his front lawn, nearly hitting the homeowner.
It felt like, wow, we kind of got it off easy.
And the more the Zellners learn, the more they discover just how lucky they really were.
Come to find out that this burglar, only a couple of hours earlier, had stolen a firearm.
Knowing, especially after the fact that he had stolen a gun earlier in the day, and you see where things could have gone much worse. And we were very lucky that he was already gone by the time Megan got home.
But this criminal's compulsive behavior is about to become his undoing.
They caught him the next day. I think they found him sleeping in his car.
Yeah, with a bunch of stolen driver's licenses.
Yeah, something weird like that. When they caught him, it was then very easy to connect the dots to the 2 other crimes in the neighborhood.
The burglar is quickly identified as 32-year-old Randall Lee Laster, a known felon with burglary and robbery charges stretching back to 2002.
People started learning a little bit more about him, and we kind of were like, took him back. He kept making bad decisions after bad decisions, and we were just a blip on his bad decision train.
Laster is charged with unlawful possession of a firearm and 2 counts of burglary of a habitation. He is convicted on all charges and sentenced to 15 years in prison. Being able to share their video and their experience online has done more for the Zellners than just help catch the culprit.
The neighborhood kind of grouped together and put together the evidence that eventually tied him to the crimes and led to his conviction. But for us, it was more of like taking control over a situation that felt pretty violating, getting that community involvement and reassurance. I think it helped us sleep at night instead of being scared of where we live.
And coming up next, a terrifying act of arson.
Those are big flames. She could have hurt herself. She didn't seem to care about that.
June 10th, 2019, Del City, Oklahoma. In broad daylight, in a residential suburb, a woman is caught on camera committing an outrageous crime.
How crazy is this video? This lady looks like she's someone's little nice mother or grandmother. And she walks up and she just starts firing repeatedly into this house. And I'm like, what in the world is going on?
She fires a round of shots into the house in a very calm, cool way. And it doesn't seem like she cares if she's seen.
What really struck me was her demeanor. How she kind of just sashays up, looks a little bit over here, a little bit over there, and all of a sudden, she starts shooting. Is someone in there? And is somebody gonna return fire? Really, what's gonna happen? I had no idea.
Who is this woman? And who or what is she shooting at?
It gets worse. She walks off and comes back with a flaming towel. She takes this big flaming towel and throws it into the same entrance where she was shooting.
Those are big flames. She could have hurt herself. She didn't seem to care about that. This was a woman on a mission. She is dead set on getting rid of whoever's in that house or burning that house down, period.
There's so much that we don't know. What could happen to a person that would make them want to do such a thing?
The home quickly bursts into flames. And as the Del City Fire Department races to the scene, the property owner, Chris Bottoms, who's nearly 20 miles away at the time, learns about the blaze from a heartbreaking phone call.
And I got the call a little bit before 3, and my ex-wife, Christine, called, and she said the house is on fire. I became pretty emotional.
For the 57-year-old Army veteran, the fire is a devastating blow.
You know, that's the home that I took care of both my parents, my mother and father in. And it was also where we took care of my sister till the day she died. They all passed in that home. My brother, he was pretty quick about coming straight to me. We went directly to my property. As we were pulling up, it was still smoldering. The firemen had just put the fire out, and they were just starting to put out the crime tape. There's not one part of the home that was not touched. There was nothing that I felt could be recovered. It was a total loss from the beginning.
And as he looks at the smoldering wreckage, Chris is also confronted with a disturbing realization.
My brother felt that the insurance company was going to have questions about how the fire started. And he said, your main reason for being here is you're going to have an alibi.
The brother said, if it looks like it was arson, Chris, you're going to be a suspect. So he had a lot of trouble. It was traumatizing. This man was cut to his core.
The thought that he might be considered the prime suspect in the destruction of his family's home is overwhelming, especially when a local news crew arrives to cover the story.
Del City Fire responded to a fully engulfed house on Becker Place.
The reporter interviews neighbor Annie Durham.
All I know, I was in the house and I saw smoke.
But there's a huge catch. This neighbor is the same woman caught on the shocking video.
She calmly shoots into the house and throws a big flame into the house and then puts on a performance. And she does not seem remorseful. In fact, she seems proud. With her body language, she has her chest puffed out and her head held high. So Annie seems pretty confident that they're gonna buy her story.
This woman is just standing there giving her eyewitness account, saying that she doesn't know what happened. And you never in your mind think that the innocent witness speaking is actually the villain.
In Del City, Oklahoma, a fire at his family home leaves Chris Bottoms grieving.
I lost souvenirs, family pictures, everything. I don't have childhood pictures anymore. And my 33 years of marriage and travel with my own family, just gone.
And worse, he fears police will think he's a suspect himself. burning his unoccupied and neglected home for an insurance payout.
I was in financial difficulty. I was not making payments on the home, and basically the home was in disrepair at that time.
Sometimes it's hard for people to let go of property, even though they know that it's dilapidated, because they have an emotional bond to it. And then he has this added stress and pressure thinking, what if they think it's me? I mean, that's gotta cause him emotional turmoil.
But then, a stunning discovery changes everything. The real arsonist, Chris's neighbor, Annie Durham, is caught on her own surveillance camera.
It was actually my ex-wife that pointed out to the fire marshal, you know, Mrs. Durham's got a security system, maybe it caught how the fire started. And she initially refused to give the footage, but she knew that they were just waiting on a warrant.
She tried to say no, but eventually they convinced her to let them see this footage.
My understanding is she thought she had deleted it, but it was just password protected and they had to crack the password. So computer forensic specialists were able to recover the footprint and give us the video that we have showing that what she did.
And as the video comes to light, so does the long history of strife between these two neighbors.
The feud between myself and Ann Durham went on for about 5 years, and it wasn't really bad when my family was there. She complained about trees in the yard, and anybody that blocked her view of what her cameras were able to record, she complained.
But as the years pass by, tensions begin to boil over.
After my divorce, that's when things started to get bad. I decided to rent rooms to individuals, and unfortunately, instead of paying in money, they'd come with their drugs.
At the time, the Army veteran admits that he too got lost in the downward spiral of drug addiction, allowing his home to become a den for other drug users.
It was never a drug house with my family there. And unfortunately, when I moved these individuals into my home, it evolved into that.
Chris's life and his home begin to fall into ruin. And Annie Durham isn't happy about the dangerous new element next door.
The fire chief I talked to said he thought it might be he said this is an abandoned house, so it might be some vagrants or something.
Well, actually, there's been drug addicts living there, running in and out.
As she was getting more protective of her property. So in a 5-month period, I would say that Mrs. Durham called the police 25 times on my home. And I called twice on her. And then the home was condemned in 2017. Therefore, I was not allowed to be there. They never allowed me to go back in my home.
When the home is condemned, Chris is forced to move out and clean up his act.
I spent 28 days at the Serenity House, which is basically where veterans will go to receive help. I'm free of drugs now, and I don't want to go back to doing drugs.
But there are still big problems at the now abandoned house he left behind.
Even after the water's cut off, the electricity's cut off, people were still breaking into the home. I even turned in a couple of people when I caught them in the home, and the police arrested them and gave them trespassing tickets.
The constant trespassing is what pushes Annie Durham to her breaking point, and she decides to take matters into her own hands.
I believe that somebody was in the home, began antagonizing her and getting her riled up enough to do what she did.
This was likely a form of social vigilantism. Social vigilantes truly believe that they're acting on behalf of society. And it's quite possible that she felt that, you know what, I have to get rid of this house because there are probably people who are squatting there, people who are using drugs there, you know, it's dangerous for the neighborhood, I'm actually doing a good thing here.
I do feel some empathy for her. It's very difficult to live with bad neighbors, and Chris was worse than a bad neighbor. But while we can understand that that must have been living hell for Annie, what she chose to do with it, that is the #1 issue. There's a lot of things you can do before you get to the point where you're shooting into a home and throwing firebombs into the home.
1 week after setting the fire, Annie Durham is arrested and charged with second-degree arson and discharging a firearm into a dwelling. She is currently out on bail and awaiting trial. Months later, the remains of Chris's home are leveled. But despite his crushing loss, Chris believes it's time to bring this feud to a peaceful end.
I have a lot of regrets. And when I was given a phone call by the district attorney's office concerning Ann's charges and what I expected to happen, I said, I understand what she did, and I don't want this woman to go to prison for it. I feel like there's a lot of blame to go around. If I don't forgive her, then I'm going to be bitter, angry, unhappy, and I don't want to live that way.
A doorbell camera captures a frightening scene.
You really never expect to see something like this.
What is going on? She just has total erratic behavior.
Terrifying the homeowner who is home alone.
Things were happening so fast. She's coming through my window and I'm screaming.
And coming up later, another mystery at the door with a half-dressed woman in shackles.
Caught on camera in the middle of the night.
It looked like she was being chased or followed.
But then she disappears. What is she so afraid of?
Was she the victim of a sex trafficking ring? Was she being held in someone's basement?
At this point, we don't know if she's dead or alive.
Caught on camera, a bizarre attempted break-in at a home in the Tower District.
It's disturbing video. Just before midnight on June 29th, 2018, a woman frantically tries to get into a home in Fresno, California.
She appears to be in distress, banging out this window. This is extremely scary.
The woman pulls aggressively on the front door. When she can't get in, she moves over to the living room window, desperately pounding on it with her elbows.
She appears confused. She looks upset.
Does she live inside this house? Is she running from someone?
This woman is clearly agitated. Could she be on drugs? Could she be suffering a mental crisis? We just don't know at this point.
The distraught woman starts pacing, then approaches another window, pleading with someone inside.
This woman has one thing on her mind, and that's to get inside this house.
When she gets no response, she takes matters into her own hands. She takes a few steps backwards and then charges forward and body slams into the window, not once, but twice, and appears completely unfazed by the impact.
When someone doesn't appear to be feeling any pain and they're behaving violently and harming themselves, either they're intoxicated or they're on some type of substance, or they're psychotic and they're just not in touch with reality.
Why is she so desperate to get inside this house? Whatever the reason, the situation is about to become even more dangerous.
Things get even crazier. We see her actually pulling on this screen, and then she actually pulls the screen from the window.
In one swift move, she rips the screen right off. And that's when the horrified homeowner starts screaming.
When you're in your home, you typically feel safe. You see it as a place where nothing really bad will happen to you.
But strangely, rather than flee the scene, the intruder leans into the window and only appears even more confused.
What is going on?
She doesn't seem like she really understands what's happening.
It's clear that this woman is out of it. This is just really bizarre. What is going on? This must be terrifying for the homeowner. I mean, once this person gets in, anything can happen.
The homeowner calls 911.
911, state your emergency.
She broke into my house. She broke through the window.
Then, the homeowner issues a shocking warning to the agitated woman.
I have a gun!
She starts saying, listen, I have a gun. I'm going to shoot you. She's using everything in her power to keep this woman outside of her house.
What is going on? I will shoot! I have a gun! Why? She announces that she has a weapon. This is important because this lets the intruder know that if they enter that house, they can be met with deadly force.
So this intruder is not backing down. And this homeowner is left with basically two choices. She can protect herself or she can get attacked. So she may fire her weapon.
How is this highly volatile situation going to end?
I made sure she knew I had a weapon. And if she was going to attempt to get in my house, that wasn't going to happen.
On June 29th, 2018, a doorbell camera captures a disoriented intruder breaking into a woman's home.
Get away! What is going on?
That incident was all caught on this shocking surveillance video.
What is going on? I will shoot! I have a gun! Why? What are you doing?
Things were happening so fast. She's coming through my window and I'm screaming, letting her know if she was going to come in, I was going to shoot.
Christine Paul is home alone when the harrowing ordeal begins.
I was at home binging Gilmore Girls and the doorbell rang. Since my husband had gone out with his friends, I naturally thought that he had not taken his key.
Christine opens the door, and as soon as she sees the agitated stranger outside, she slams the door, locking it immediately.
There was something seriously wrong with her, so I immediately closed it.
But Christine says shutting the door somehow sets the woman off even more.
She became fixated that there was somebody in the house and she wanted to be in. Walking around my porch, kept knocking, kept banging. She wouldn't stop.
As Christine calls 911 and waits for police to arrive.
911, state emergency.
I have somebody trying to break into my house. Oh, she's banging on my door now. She's banging.
The woman becomes increasingly hostile.
She broke into my house. She broke through the window.
She backs up and she makes a run for it and turns that shoulder and hits that window. That's when she started to put her arm through my glass window.
What is going on? I will shoot! I have a gun!
And by that time, I already had gotten my gun.
As it turns out, this crazed woman is knocking at the wrong door. But Christine has been trained for tense situations and discharging a weapon. She just never thought it would be in her own home.
I am a retired police officer. I didn't know what she was on in the past of dealing with people that were on different substances. You don't know their state of mind. That's scary. And I didn't know what she was going to do. I had my house to protect and my dogs and myself.
What are you doing?
With the intruder just moments from bursting through her window, Christine faces an agonizing choice.
It's not an easy decision because at that point coming in, and as close as I was to her, that is taking a life.
But then, just seconds before having to make that tragic decision, the situation takes a dramatic turn.
They're arriving now, okay?
I just have my gun out. I don't want them to shoot me in my dog.
As a police officer approaches the house, the woman who just seconds before was in a state of sheer panic suddenly goes calm.
Hi. Hi.
Do you live here?
No, I don't.
So why are you banging on the door?
The responding officer does an excellent job. He speaks in calming tones. He basically de-escalates the situation.
So why are you banging on the door?
Because my friend was there.
The would-be intruder is a 30-year-old woman, and despite her saying a friend lives in the house, Christine has never met her. The woman is arrested and charged with misdemeanor vandalism.
They also say it appears that she was under the influence of something.
It was very shocking. There's a great possibility that her choices for that night were maybe not the right ones.
With the would-be intruder in custody, Christine's ordeal finally seems over. But just 24 hours later, something unexpected happens. A police chaplain shows up at Christine's door.
I just want to introduce myself.
I opened up the storm door also, thinking, wow, the chaplain's coming to talk to me about the situation because I've been a victim. When in fact, that wasn't the case.
It turns out this police chaplain is the father of the woman who was arrested the night before.
My daughter is the one that broke the
No,
window.
don't be here.
I immediately shut the door, slammed the door, yelled, "You can't be here," and called 911.
This could be considered witness tampering. What is he trying to get this homeowner to do? To drop the charges? This is clearly inappropriate.
You just don't do that. No.
The Fresno Police Department launches an investigation.
Now we've learned a Fresno police chaplain is under investigation in connection to this case.
2 years later, and after multiple court hearings, the woman is given leniency since she has no criminal record, and charges against her are ultimately dropped.
I think she got 8 hours of community work or some type of crisis counseling.
As for Christine, as terrifying as that night was, she's just relieved it wasn't worse.
I'm just grateful I had the training to think clearly and not discharge my weapon because everybody was able to walk away from it.
She also is thankful for her home surveillance system and says today her house is protected like a fortress.
I have now 2 cameras outside. I have cameras inside my house, not only in my kitchen, but in my office, in my bedroom, because you don't know what it's going to catch.
Coming up, another frightening mystery caught on a doorbell camera.
Like someone who had been kidnapped and being held against their will.
The mysterious video is just 7 seconds long.
So many people wondering, is she okay?
This bizarre video, captured on a doorbell camera, is viewed by millions.
I probably watched it 50 times in a row.
I've probably watched it 100 times.
It was very scary.
It happens on August 24th, 2018. Montgomery, Texas, 3:20 a.m. A half-dressed woman rings a doorbell in the middle of the night.
She was wearing a white t-shirt. Did not look like she was wearing any pants. She had restraints on her hands.
Appears to be shackled, appears to be under some kind of duress.
She was looking around. It looked like she was being chased or followed. She was very scared.
Like someone who had been kidnapped and being held against their will, and they escaped from their captor and they were trying to seek help.
Whatever she's running from, this woman is clearly desperate.
Those are rose bushes she's climbing through. She's obviously trying to hide from somebody. She was obviously very frightened.
But who is she so afraid of?
Who else is there? Where are they? What are they doing? Are they armed?
There are so many questions. How did she end up barefoot? What about those restraints on her arms? And what if this half-dressed woman isn't the only victim?
Maybe this was some kind of sex trafficking thing where they were holding girls hostage and one of them got away.
And that was the scary thing because we got to find where she came from and we got to find it really, really quick because we don't know how many others are in this situation right now.
Even more troubling, nobody knows what happens to this woman after she rings the bell.
She rang the doorbell and then the video froze.
Internet issues can cause a doorbell camera to occasionally freeze. But in this case, it couldn't have come at a worse time.
Anything could have happened to her after she left that home. At this point, we don't know if she's dead or alive.
The homeowners are woken up by the ringing doorbell. But by the time they try to play back the frozen footage, the woman is long gone. And they have no idea who she is.
This is just the latest troubling incident caught on a doorbell camera.
It turns out this is just one in a string of recent videos showing terrified women approaching private homes. Just the day before, an eerily similar video from Canada made big news. That woman is found safe, but the woman in Texas has completely vanished. Nobody knows where she is or who she is. Police and neighbors launch a frantic search to find her.
The woods are very thick back there. We went into the woods, very deep into the woods. It was very, very scary, and we were all screaming, if you're out here, come out. We're here to help you. We're all females. We will get you to a safe place.
But 3 days later, there's still no sign of her.
Texas police, they are still trying to find this mystery lady.
That mystery woman caught on camera in the middle of the night.
Who is she and where has she gone? When a mystery woman rings a doorbell in the middle of the night in Texas, the video sends panic through the neighborhood. What if other women in the area are also in trouble?
You could tell she was in a panic. The video struck me because of the fear and terror on her face, along with the restraints being on her arms.
I did not feel comfortable going out to get my mail.
Jenny Drude is the neighbor who posts the doorbell video because the homeowners themselves want to remain anonymous. And it immediately goes viral.
Within 24 hours, I was getting like 50 posts a second. It was crazy. It had thousands and thousands of shares from France, Germany, Africa, Australia, all over the United States.
On social media, rumors run wild.
Was she the victim of a sex trafficking ring? Was she being held in someone's basement?
People were scared to let their kids out to play.
Some people speculate that the woman is pregnant. Others rush to Texas, convinced that they know who she is.
We had people flying in from all over. They would say that was my sister. And that was the scary thing because you had several people telling you that is my sister.
It's not surprising for people to come forward to want to claim this young lady because if you're the family member of someone who's missing, it's going to get your hopes up.
Then, on August 29th, police finally get some answers.
A 32-year-old white female is confirmed to be the female in the doorbell video.
And the story takes a shocking turn.
This incident becomes as twisted as a pretzel.
3 weeks after the video first goes viral, the woman at the center of the mystery speaks publicly. The 32-year-old is identified only by her first name.
I woke up and he was kneeling on my chest, stuffing some cloths in my mouth, duct taping my entire head.
The man she claims assaulted her is 49-year-old Dennis Collins, her boyfriend of 4 months.
I truly felt like I was going to die there that night.
She says he bound her hands and feet with restraints, the kind commonly used in sexual play. But she escaped when he let her get a drink from the kitchen.
After being held against her will, she was seeking assistance in the middle of the night.
Lauren says she rings a number of doorbells, but when no one comes to help her, she goes back to her boyfriend's house, gets her car, and drives to Dallas to be with family. But Lauren never reports anything to the police. In fact, it's the police who find her. 5 days after the doorbell incident, her boyfriend's ex-wife calls the police, worried that she hasn't heard from him.
Police find the boyfriend, and the boyfriend is dead.
Lauren's boyfriend has been shot in his own home. At first, police call the shooting suspicious. Then, they say Dennis committed suicide. They find several notes near his body, one of them addressed to Lauren.
She's very distraught about this. She's in shock that this has come to this.
Lauren, who says she had no idea the doorbell video even existed, releases a statement. It says she forgives Dennis, but alludes to his dark side. Nearly 2 decades earlier, Dennis was arrested for attempted sexual assault of a different woman. He pleaded guilty and got 5 years probation. But his brother accuses the media of wildly blowing that decades-old incident out of proportion.
They were making him out to be a villain, and it wasn't an accusation of rape. My brother and the lady involved in that were friends, even after that.
What's more, Dennis's family calls the suicide scenario highly suspicious. On the same day his body was found, August 29th, he walked his 13-year-old daughter to school.
Great dad, great dad. He had so much to live for. It just didn't feel right.
They also don't believe he wrote the notes that police found.
They were sloppy, rushed, definitely not the way he would write them.
Neighbors are suspicious too.
Maybe he did kill himself, but we're definitely thinking that it's also a possibility that someone else killed him.
They find it odd that Lauren says she rang a few doorbells when there's no evidence she did.
There is no other video. I had asked for everybody to look at their cameras, but nobody else seen anything that night.
Then, another stunning twist. Police discover that Lauren has her own history of arrests for theft and possession of controlled substances. In September 2019, 1 year after the doorbell incident, a warrant is issued for her arrest after she fails to show up in court on new charges of theft and shoplifting. Jeff believes Lauren knows more about Dennis's death than she's admitting. He thinks she got caught up with a bad crowd, and some of those people wanted Dennis dead. And a conversation with Lauren a few days after Dennis's body is found seems to confirm that.
Sat on the floor with her for 2 hours, face to face. She said she wasn't sure that he actually shot himself. And she said, well, I have people in my life that I'm way more scared of, that she was going to wind up dead because of these other people. And your brother became aware of it. He was trying to get me away from those people.
The shocking revelation haunts Dennis's family, especially since police initially called the shooting suspicious. But police say the case is closed and maintain that it is a suicide. Through her family, Lauren declined to comment, and Dennis's family is left to struggle with what they believe are unresolved questions.
I don't want to call anyone a liar, but I miss him. I miss him.
Will we ever know the truth behind this video and what really happened between Lauren and Dennis?
In the years following the death of Lucas Achai, the case gradually moved from the urgency of breaking news into the slower, more permanent space of public memory. The investigation ended, the trials concluded, and the courts delivered their final decisions. But the questions surrounding the tragedy continued to influence how people understood the case. Some remembered it as one of the most controversial criminal investigations in modern Italy. Others remembered it as the story of a young man whose life ended during a moment of sudden violence. For Luca's family and those who knew him personally, however, the case was never only about evidence, defendants, or courtroom arguments. It was about a person whose absence became part of their daily lives. Behind every page of legal documents and every televised discussion was the reality that a 24-year-old man was no longer able to experience the future that once awaited him. The passage of time often changes the way society remembers major criminal cases. In the immediate aftermath of a tragedy, attention focuses on shock, uncertainty, and the search for answers. Later, as investigations conclude and media coverage decreases, the public begins to see the larger meaning of what happened. The Lucas Achai case followed this pattern. At first, Italy reacted to the image of a young man killed while apparently defending his girlfriend. Then, as investigators uncovered additional evidence, the story became more complicated. Finally, after years of legal proceedings, the case became a broader reflection on how truth is discovered, how responsibility is determined, and how victims should be remembered. One of the most significant aspects of the case was the contrast between the simplicity of the moment itself and the complexity of everything that followed. The physical confrontation lasted only a short period of time. According to the reconstruction accepted by investigators and the courts, the attack outside John Cabot Pub unfolded in approximately 30 seconds. In that brief interval, Anastasia Kylemik was attacked, Luca reacted, and a single gunshot changed multiple lives forever. Yet understanding why that moment occurred required years of investigation. Police had to examine movements, communications, relationships, and evidence that existed far beyond the immediate crime scene. Prosecutors had to present a reconstruction capable of explaining not only what happened, but why it happened. Courts had to evaluate the evidence carefully and determine the responsibility of each person involved. This contrast between the speed of violence and the length of justice is one of the most difficult. Realities of criminal cases. A crime may occur in seconds, but the consequences can continue for decades. Families carry grief long after courtrooms become silent. Communities remember places where tragedies occurred. Investigators continue reviewing details until every possible question has been addressed. The Lucas Achai case represented this reality clearly. A single moment outside a Roman pub created years of legal proceedings and left behind questions that extended far beyond the night itself. The case also demonstrated how fragile first impressions can be. When the first reports emerged, the explanation appeared clear. Two criminals had allegedly attempted to steal a backpack. Luca had intervened, and he had been killed as a result. This interpretation was understandable based on the information available at the time. However, the later investigation showed that crimes are rarely as simple as they first appear. The recovered backpack, which still contained personal documents and more than 2,000 euros, created doubts about the original robbery theory. Surveillance footage showing the suspect's movements near the pub suggested preparation. Mobile phone analysis revealed communication between individuals connected to the alleged transaction. These discoveries changed the direction of the investigation and demonstrated why law enforcement must continue searching even when an initial explanation appears convincing. The evolution of the Lucas Achai case also highlighted the difference between public perception and judicial conclusions. Public opinion often seeks a clear narrative: heroes and criminals, victims and perpetrators, right and wrong. Real criminal investigations, however, are usually more complicated. They involve evidence, uncertainty, competing explanations, and legal standards that must be applied carefully. The courts examining Luca's death were not responsible for confirming the most emotionally satisfying version of events. Their responsibility was to determine what could be proven. This distinction shaped the final outcome of the case. The judgments delivered through the Italian legal system reflected this careful approach. Valerio Del Grosso was held responsible as the person who fired the fatal shot. Paolo Perino was convicted for his role in the assault and attempted robbery. Marcello De Propris was convicted for his involvement in providing the weapon used in the crime. Anastasia Kylemnik received a separate conviction related to violations of drug laws, but was not convicted of homicide. These different outcomes reflected the court's assessment that each person's role had to be considered individually. Perhaps the most important judicial conclusion concerned Luca himself. Despite the investigation into an alleged drug transaction involving several individuals, the courts did not establish that Luca had directly negotiated or organized the purchase of marijuana. This point remained essential because it prevented the circumstances surrounding the case from changing the identity of the victim. Luca was not defined by the allegations involving others. According to the court findings, he was the person who lost his life after responding to an attack against his girlfriend. His final action was a reaction to violence unfolding in front of him, not evidence of participation in the criminal activity examined during the investigation. This distinction matters because victims in high-profile cases can sometimes become overshadowed by the controversy surrounding the crime. As investigators uncover complicated details, public attention can shift toward the surrounding circumstances rather than the individual who suffered the greatest loss. The Lucas Achai case experienced this tension. Discussions about the alleged drug transaction, the suspects, and the legal arguments sometimes risked moving attention away from the central human tragedy. Remembering Luca requires acknowledging the full context of the case while also recognizing that he was a person whose life had value beyond the circumstances of his death. Before he became the subject of national headlines, Lucas Achai was a young man living his everyday life in Rome. He worked as a personal trainer and was known within his local fitness community. He had relationships with family and friends. He had ordinary routines, personal goals, and a future that was never allowed to unfold. These details may appear simple, but they are precisely what make victims real. A person is not defined only by the final moments of their life. The years before tragedy are equally important because they reveal the person who existed beyond the crime. The decision by Luca's family to donate his organs after his death remains one of the most meaningful elements of the story because it reflected compassion during an unimaginable moment of suffering. While the criminal investigation focused on violence and responsibility, the choice made by his family represented something entirely different, an effort to create something positive from a devastating loss. It was a reminder that even after a violent act takes away a life, the values of that person and the choices made by those who love them can still have an impact. The legacy of the Luca Sacchai case is therefore not limited to the details of the investigation. It is also found in the questions the case raises about how society responds to crime. How quickly should conclusions be reached? How should media report on developing investigations? How can justice balance public emotion with legal precision? How should victims be remembered when the circumstances surrounding their deaths become complicated? These questions extend beyond one individual case. They are part of the broader challenge of understanding crime in a responsible and humane way. The investigation showed that truth is often not discovered through one dramatic revelation, but through the patient accumulation of facts. A surveillance recording, a recovered object, a phone record, a witness statement. Each piece contributed to a larger picture. No single element alone explained everything. Together, they allowed investigators and courts to reconstruct the events surrounding Luca's death. This process serves as a reminder that justice depends not on assumptions, but on careful examination. At the same time, the case demonstrated the limits of justice. Courts can determine responsibility. They can impose sentences. They can establish a legal record of what happened. But they cannot reverse the consequences of violence. They cannot return Luca to his family. They cannot erase the pain experienced by those who lost him. A verdict can provide accountability, but it cannot provide restoration. For this reason, the final memory of Luca Sacchai should not be limited to the circumstances of October 23, 2019. It should include the person he was before that night. It should include the family who chose generosity even while grieving. It should include the investigators who worked to uncover the truth and a legal system that examined the evidence over years of proceedings. The case was defined by tragedy, but it also revealed moments of courage, responsibility, and humanity. Ultimately, the story of Luca Sacchai is a reminder that behind every criminal case is a human life. Behind every investigation is a family waiting for answers. Behind every courtroom decision is a loss that cannot be measured only through legal language. The final chapter of this case is not simply about the sentences imposed or the evidence presented. It is about remembering that a young man's life mattered before he became a victim. Luca Sacchai's name remains connected to one of Italy's most closely followed criminal investigations of recent years. But beyond the controversy, beyond the accusations, and beyond the courtroom debates, his story remains fundamentally human. It is the story of an ordinary evening that became an extraordinary tragedy, of a family forced to live with an irreversible loss, and of a justice system that spent years searching for the truth. The investigation may have ended, but remembrance continues. And perhaps the most important lesson left behind is this: every victim deserves to be seen as more than the circumstances that ended their life. Every name in a criminal case represents a person who once had dreams, relationships, and a future. Luca Sacchai was one of those people. His story remains not only a record of a crime, but also a reminder of the value of a life, lost too soon. To understand why the murder of Willie Branchi continues to haunt Italy decades later, it is necessary to step away from the crime scene and travel back to the place where his life began. Long before investigators debated theories, before witnesses changed their stories, before newspapers described the case as one of the country's most troubling cold cases, there was simply a young man living an ordinary life in a quiet town. His name was Vilfredo Luciano Branchi, though almost no one called him that. To his family, his neighbors, and the people of Goro, he was simply Willie. He was 18 years old when he died, standing at the threshold between adolescence and adulthood. Like many young people in small communities, his world was not especially large. His daily routines, the familiar faces he encountered, and the places he visited were all part of a life that followed a comforting rhythm. Nothing about him suggested that he would one day become the center of a mystery that would remain unresolved for nearly 4 decades. Goro sits in the province of Ferrara, within Italy's Emilia-Romagna region, close to the expansive Po River Delta. It is a town shaped by water. Fishing is not merely an occupation there. It is woven into the identity of the community itself. Generations of families have depended on the rivers and the Adriatic Sea for their livelihood. Boats leave before sunrise, returning later with the day's catch. Conversations often revolve around tides, weather, and fishing seasons. The pace of life has traditionally been slower than that of Italy's larger cities, and relationships between residents are unusually close. In a place like Goro, anonymity is almost impossible. Most people recognize each other by sight. Families know one another across generations. News spreads quickly, and unusual events rarely remain private for long. This closeness can create a strong sense of belonging, but it can also foster an environment where reputation matters deeply. Personal matters often remain within families, and sensitive subjects are sometimes discussed only in whispers, if at all. Years after Willie's death, investigators would point to what they described as a culture of silence within the community, believing that this atmosphere may have complicated the search for the truth. Whether that silence resulted from fear, loyalty, uncertainty, or something else entirely remains unknown. What is clear is that the social dynamics of such a small town formed the backdrop against which every stage of the investigation unfolded. Willie himself was known as a gentle and polite young man. Those who knew him consistently described him as kind, respectful, and unlikely to become involved in conflicts. He was physically striking, standing close to 2 meters tall, making him noticeably taller than many of those around him. Yet despite his imposing height, there was little about his personality that suggested aggression or confrontation. On the contrary, accounts from people who knew him painted the picture of someone quiet and trusting, someone who generally accepted people at face value. An important aspect of Willie's life was his mild intellectual disability. According to the available information, he experienced a slight cognitive impairment that affected his judgment and made him more vulnerable than many others his age. It did not prevent him from participating in everyday life, nor did it define him as a person. However, it did mean that he tended to trust people easily. Friends, acquaintances, and investigators alike acknowledged that this characteristic made him particularly susceptible to manipulation. In any criminal investigation, understanding the vulnerabilities of a victim can be essential. In Willie's case, investigators would later consider whether his trusting nature had placed him in circumstances from which he was unable to protect himself. This possibility became one of the many questions surrounding the events of his final evening. Willie lived with his family, who were described as a close-knit household. They represented an ordinary working family whose lives revolved around the routines of the town. There is no indication in the available evidence that Willie experienced serious conflicts at home or that he was living a particularly troubled life. Instead, his family relationships appear to have been supportive and stable. Among those closest to him was his brother, Luca Branchi. Although the events that would later define Luca's public role lay years in the future, the bond between the brothers would become one of the enduring elements of this story. After Willie's murder, Luca would spend decades seeking answers, repeatedly urging authorities not to abandon the investigation. His persistence would eventually contribute to the reopening of the case many years later. Yet in September 1988, none of that could have been imagined. At that time, the Branchi family was simply living an ordinary life, unaware that everything was about to change. The final day of Willie's life began without any indication that it would end differently from countless others before it. On September 29, 1988, he went about his normal activities. Nothing in the available record suggests that he appeared frightened, distressed, or concerned about his safety. As the day progressed, he encountered several people within the community, just as he often did. One female witness would later tell investigators that she had seen Willie only a few hours before his disappearance. Her testimony introduced a detail that would become significant during later stages of the investigation. According to her account, Willie was carrying approximately 200,000 Italian lire in his wallet. At the time, this represented a relatively substantial amount of money for an 18-year-old. Years later, investigators would revisit this detail while examining the possibility that robbery might have played a role in his death. However, that theory would remain only one among several competing explanations. As evening approached, Willie was seen at a local pizza restaurant. Witnesses reported seeing him in the company of several men from the town. These sightings would later become critically important because they represented the final confirmed moments during which Willie was known to be alive. Unfortunately, none of the available testimony has been able to reconstruct with certainty everything that happened after those encounters. Investigators could establish where Willie had been seen, but they could not establish precisely where he went afterward or exactly who remained with him during his final hours. That uncertainty would become one of the defining characteristics of the case. Every investigation depends on constructing a reliable timeline, yet in Willie's murder, the timeline begins to dissolve precisely when it matters most. The transition from an ordinary evening to a violent crime remains hidden behind gaps in memory, conflicting statements, and missing evidence. As darkness settled over Goro on September 29th, Willie did not return home. Under ordinary circumstances, this immediately stood out to his family. According to the available information, Willie was known for returning home on time. His disappearance was therefore unusual enough to cause concern without delay. His family began searching for him, looking throughout the town and hoping that perhaps he had simply stayed longer than expected with friends or acquaintances. In a larger city, a few hours' absence might not immediately raise alarm. In Goro, however, routines were familiar. People noticed when someone failed to appear where they were expected. The Branchi family searched, but no explanation emerged. As the night continued, uncertainty gradually replaced expectation. Nobody knew that, only hours later, the search would end in the worst possible way. Looking back today, there is something profoundly unsettling about the simplicity of Willie's final known movements. He spent the afternoon as he normally would. He met people who knew him. He visited a familiar restaurant. He remained within the boundaries of a town where nearly everyone recognized him. There were no verified reports of arguments, no documented threats, and no confirmed indication that he believed he was in danger. Yet somewhere between those ordinary moments and the following morning, everything changed. It is precisely this contrast that has made Willie Branchi's case so enduring. There is no dramatic beginning that clearly signals impending violence. Instead, the story moves almost imperceptibly from routine to tragedy. For investigators, This absence of obvious warning signs made reconstructing the crime especially difficult. Without a clear motive, without reliable physical evidence pointing toward a specific individual, and without witnesses capable of describing exactly what occurred during Willie's final hours, the investigation would soon become dependent on fragments rather than certainty. Those fragments would accumulate over the years, generating theories, but rarely producing definitive answers. At the center of every theory, however, remained the same young man described by friends and family as gentle, trusting, and kind. Before his name became associated with one of Italy's most famous unsolved murders, Willie Branchi was simply an 18-year-old from Goro who left home on what appeared to be an ordinary September evening. He expected, as his family surely expected, to return. Instead, his disappearance would become the beginning of a mystery that continues to challenge investigators, divide opinions, and leave one family waiting for answers that have never come. By the evening of September 29, 1988, nothing appeared unusual about Willie Branchi's day. He had spent the afternoon moving through the familiar surroundings of Goro, greeting people he knew and following the kind of routine that had become second nature. The town itself was settling into another ordinary night. Fishing boats had returned, restaurants welcomed local customers, and the streets reflected the quiet rhythm of a community where very little escaped notice. It was a place where people often believed they knew exactly where their neighbors were and who they were spending time with. Ironically, that sense of familiarity would later become one of the greatest contradictions in the entire investigation. In a town where almost everyone knew everyone else, investigators would ultimately discover that reconstructing Willie's final hours was far more difficult than anyone had imagined. During the evening, Willie was seen at a local pizza restaurant. Witnesses later confirmed that he was there and that he was in the company of several men from the town. These sightings are among the last verified moments of his life. Beyond those observations, certainty begins to disappear. Investigators have never been able to establish with confidence where Willie went after leaving the restaurant, who remained with him, or what conversations may have taken place during those final hours. The available evidence simply ends. Every attempt to continue the timeline relies on fragmented witness statements rather than indisputable facts. That missing stretch of time has remained one of the greatest voids in the case for nearly 4 decades. Earlier that day, a female witness had reported seeing Willie carrying approximately 200,000 Italian lire in his wallet. At the time, this detail appeared insignificant. It was merely one observation among many collected during the investigation. Only years later would investigators revisit that fact while considering whether robbery might have played some role in the events that followed. Yet even then, the amount of money alone could not explain the extraordinary violence that would soon be revealed. As darkness covered Goro, Willie failed to return home. For most 18-year-olds, arriving home later than expected might not immediately provoke alarm. But according to those closest to him, Willie was known for returning at predictable times. His family recognized almost immediately that something was wrong. As the hours passed without any sign of him, concern grew into genuine fear. The Branchi family began looking for him throughout the town. They checked the places where he normally spent time and hoped someone might know where he had gone. No one did, or at least no one was able to provide the answers they desperately needed. The search continued into the night, but Willie remained missing. At that moment, his family could not have imagined what awaited them only a few hours later. The following morning, on September 30th, 1988, the search came to a devastating end. Willie's body was discovered near the banks of the Po River, close to Goro. The discovery transformed what had begun as a missing person search into a homicide investigation. Unlike anything the small community had experienced, the condition of the body immediately indicated that this had not been a spontaneous act of Violence. Whoever had attacked Willie had done so with exceptional brutality. He was found completely naked. His clothing had disappeared. Even decades later, those clothes have never been recovered. The disappearance of his clothing immediately became one of the many unanswered questions surrounding the crime. Investigators could not determine with certainty why the clothing had been removed or what had happened to it after the murder. The absence of such an important piece of physical evidence would complicate the investigation from its earliest stages. Willie's face had suffered severe injuries. The extensive bruising and damage showed that he had been subjected to repeated blunt force violence before his death. According to the forensic examination, numerous blows had been delivered to his head and face with tremendous force. Several facial bones had been broken. The injuries were not consistent with a brief confrontation. Instead, they reflected sustained physical violence directed almost entirely toward the victim's head. For investigators, this suggested that Willie had endured a prolonged assault before receiving the fatal injury. The autopsy identified that fatal injury as a wound inflicted by a captive bolt pistol. Unlike an ordinary firearm, a captive bolt pistol is a specialized device commonly used in slaughterhouses to kill livestock quickly by driving a steel bolt into the skull. It is not designed as a conventional weapon, and its appearance in a homicide was extraordinarily unusual. The fact that such a tool had been used immediately distinguished Willie's murder from more typical killings. Investigators could not determine precisely why the killer chose this particular instrument, but its use underscored the exceptional nature of the crime. Equally significant was what investigators observed at the location where Willie's body had been discovered. Despite the extensive injuries visible during the examination, the amount of blood present near the body did not correspond to the severity of those wounds. This discrepancy became one of the earliest and most important forensic observations in the investigation. It suggested that the riverbank was not the primary crime scene. Instead, investigators concluded that Willie had almost certainly been assaulted and killed somewhere else before his body was transported and abandoned beside the river. This realization dramatically altered the investigation. Detectives were no longer searching for a killer connected only to the riverbank. They now faced the far more complicated task of identifying an entirely different crime scene, one that has never been conclusively located. If Willie had been murdered elsewhere, then someone had moved his body after death. That decision implied planning, effort, and a desire to conceal what had happened. It also raised difficult questions. Where had the assault actually taken place? How had the body been transported? Was one person responsible or multiple individuals involved? The available evidence has never provided definitive answers to those questions. The autopsy revealed further details about the violence Willie endured. The repeated blows to his face and head had caused extensive trauma, including fractured facial bones and widespread bruising across the skull. These injuries alone demonstrated the intensity of the attack. Only after this severe beating did the fatal captive bolt pistol wound occur. According to forensic experts, that wound ultimately caused Willie's death. Another issue emerged during the post-mortem examination, one that would continue to generate speculation for decades. Because of the condition of the body, the limitations of forensic science in 1988, and the fact that the body had been moved after death, experts were unable to determine conclusively whether Willie had been sexually assaulted. This uncertainty has remained unresolved ever since. Over the years, various investigative theories would consider that possibility, but no forensic conclusion has ever confirmed it. It remains one of many unanswered aspects of the case. As investigators documented the evidence, several disturbing characteristics of the crime became immediately apparent. Willie's clothing was missing. His personal belongings had disappeared. The murder weapon was highly unusual. The body had almost certainly been transported. The original crime scene remained unidentified. Every one of these facts pointed toward a crime far more complex than a random act of violence. Yet complexity did not automatically produce clarity. Instead, each confirmed fact generated additional questions that investigators could not answer with the evidence available to them. Why had Willie been stripped of his clothing? Was a removal intended to destroy evidence, mislead investigators, or for another reason entirely? The investigation has never produced a definitive answer. Why had the killer gone to the effort of moving the body? Was the original location connected to someone the killer wished to protect? Or was the riverbank simply chosen because it offered an opportunity to distance the murder from its true location? Again, the available evidence does not allow investigators to answer these questions with certainty. Even the choice of weapon remained deeply unusual. A captive bolt pistol is not something commonly associated with homicide. Investigators recognized this immediately, yet no definitive explanation emerged regarding why that particular instrument had been used. The unusual nature of the weapon became another element that separated Willie's murder from many other unsolved cases in Italy. As the first day of the investigation unfolded, authorities found themselves confronting a paradox. On one hand, they possessed clear evidence that an exceptionally violent crime had occurred. On the other hand, almost every crucial detail needed to identify the killer remained missing. The victim's final movements after leaving the restaurant could not be reconstructed with certainty. The location of the murder itself had not been found. Important physical evidence, including Willie's clothing, had vanished. The forensic limitations of the late 1980s restricted what investigators could learn from the body. Every confirmed fact seemed surrounded by even greater uncertainty. In many homicide investigations, detectives begin with a clearly defined crime scene and work outward. In Willie Branchi's case, investigators were forced to do the opposite. They began with a body deliberately left in a location that was almost certainly not where the killing had taken place. That single fact fundamentally shaped everything that followed. Instead of collecting evidence from the true murder scene, detectives first had to determine where that scene might have been. Decades later, despite repeated reviews of the evidence, advances in forensic science, and the reopening of the investigation, that original location has never been conclusively identified. By the end of September 30th, what had started as an ordinary evening in a peaceful fishing town had become one of the most disturbing criminal investigations in modern Italian history. A gentle 18-year-old had been beaten with extraordinary violence, killed with an uncommon weapon, stripped of his clothing, and abandoned beside the Po River. The physical evidence established beyond doubt that a brutal homicide had occurred. It revealed remarkably little about who committed it or why. The investigation that followed would spend decades attempting to bridge the vast distance between those two realities, a crime whose violence was undeniable and a truth that remained frustratingly beyond reach. The discovery of Willie Branchi's body transformed a quiet fishing town into the center of one of Italy's most perplexing homicide investigations. Yet from the very beginning, detectives faced a fundamental disadvantage. They were not investigating a murder that had occurred where the victim was found. The available forensic evidence strongly indicated that Willie had been killed elsewhere and that his body had later been transported to the bank of the Po River. That single conclusion complicated every aspect of the investigation. Instead of beginning with a preserved crime scene containing physical clues, investigators were forced to work backward from a location that had likely been chosen only as a place to abandon the body. The true murder scene remained unknown, and that missing location would become one of the greatest obstacles to solving the case. During the earliest stages of the investigation, detectives began interviewing anyone who might have crossed paths with Willie on September 29th, 1988. Because Goro was a small community where people generally knew one another, investigators initially believed that reconstructing his final hours would be relatively straightforward. Witnesses confirmed seeing Willie during the afternoon and later that evening at a local pizza restaurant. Several people reported that he had been in the company of one or more men from the town before disappearing. These statements established the last confirmed sightings of the victim, but they did not explain what happened afterward. Beyond those moments, the timeline quickly dissolved into uncertainty. Every homicide investigation depends on reliable witness testimony. Yet witness memories are rarely perfect. As detectives collected statements, they encountered inconsistencies that made the reconstruction of Willie's final movements increasingly difficult. Some accounts differed from others regarding timing. Others failed to clarify who remained with Willie during the last hours before his death. Instead of converging into a coherent narrative, the testimonies often created additional questions. Compounding these difficulties were problems that affected the investigation almost immediately. Later reviews of the case identified several shortcomings during the initial inquiry. The area where Willie's body had been discovered was not preserved according to the standards that modern investigators would expect. Numerous people entered and moved through the location before every possible trace could be secured. As a result, valuable evidence may have been disturbed or lost forever. Evidence preservation itself was another challenge. In 1988, forensic technology was significantly less advanced than it would become in later decades. DNA analysis was not yet the powerful investigative tool it would eventually become. And many modern techniques for examining trace evidence simply did not exist or were unavailable. Detectives, therefore, depended far more heavily on witness testimony than on scientific evidence. This imbalance would shape the entire investigation. Whenever testimony conflicted or changed, there was often little forensic evidence available to verify which version was correct. Over time, investigators also encountered another problem that would come to define the case. Witness cooperation was inconsistent. Some individuals appeared reluctant to speak openly. Others later modified earlier statements. Years afterward, prosecutors would identify several people suspected of providing false or misleading information during the investigation. Whether these inconsistencies resulted from fear, fading memory, loyalty to acquaintances, or other motivations could not always be determined. Nevertheless, every contradiction made it more difficult to establish a reliable sequence of events. As detectives examined the victim's known contacts, attention soon focused on one individual, Valeriano Forzati. Investigators considered him significant because he was believed to be among the last people to have seen Willie alive. Forzati also possessed a criminal background, making him an obvious person of interest during the early stages of the inquiry. Detectives questioned him extensively, attempting to determine whether he could account for his movements and whether any evidence connected him to the killing. Despite this scrutiny, investigators were unable to obtain sufficient proof linking Forzati to Willie's murder. No physical evidence established his involvement, and the available testimony failed to satisfy the legal standard necessary for prosecution. Consequently, he was never charged or convicted in connection with Willie's death. Although Forzati would later become involved in an unrelated massacre before fleeing to Argentina, those later crimes did not provide evidence that connected him to the Branchi case. His subsequent criminal history has often attracted public attention, but investigators have never established that he was responsible for Willie's murder. With no suspect against whom sufficient evidence existed, detectives were forced to broaden their investigation. As the years passed, several competing theories emerged, each attempting to explain not only the brutality of the crime, but also the apparent absence of a clear motive. One of the earliest theories suggested that Willie may have been killed because he accidentally learned or witnessed something that another person desperately wanted to keep secret. Investigators considered this possibility partly because of Willie's personality. Those who knew him described him as trusting and open. His mild intellectual disability meant that he sometimes spoke candidly and could be easily influenced by others. Detectives wondered whether he might have unintentionally witnessed an event, recognized certain individuals together, or learned information that placed him in danger. According to this theory, someone may have feared that Willie would later reveal what he had seen, leading to the decision to silence him permanently. Despite the theory's logic, investigators never discovered evidence capable of proving that such an event had actually occurred. No witness confirmed that Willie possessed dangerous knowledge, and no physical evidence established such a motive. Consequently, the theory remained exactly that, a possibility rather than a demonstrated fact. Another investigative direction eventually attracted even greater attention. During the late 1980s, attitudes toward homosexuality in many rural Italian communities remained deeply conservative. Within that social climate, some relationships and private meetings occurred discreetly because participants feared social stigma or public exposure. Investigators received information suggesting that secret homosexual meetings may have taken place in areas around Goro. They therefore examined the possibility that Willie had either witnessed such a gathering, been invited to one, or somehow become connected to individuals participating in these private encounters. According to this hypothesis, someone may have believed that Willie's knowledge posed a threat to maintaining secrecy. It is important to distinguish carefully between the investigative hypothesis and established fact. Authorities examined this possibility because witness statements and rumors pointed in that direction, but no court has ever confirmed that such meetings were directly connected to Willie's murder. Likewise, investigators never established that Willie himself knowingly participated in or understood any such activities. The theory has remained one of the most frequently discussed aspects of the case precisely because it has never been conclusively proven or disproven. As years passed and the investigation was reviewed again, detectives also explored another deeply troubling possibility. During the renewed inquiry, authorities examined whether a network involved in the sexual abuse of minors might have operated within the broader area. Investigators considered whether Willie's murder could somehow intersect with such criminal activity. This investigative direction reflected the obligation to examine every plausible lead rather than evidence demonstrating that such a connection actually existed. Extensive review of witness statements and available information failed to produce sufficient evidence linking Willie's death directly to any organized abuse network. As a result, this line of inquiry also ended without definitive conclusions. Another explanation appeared far simpler. Earlier witness testimony had indicated that Willie was carrying approximately 200,000 Italian lire on the day he disappeared, because his belongings were missing when his body was found. Investigators naturally considered robbery as a possible motive. According to this theory, someone may have intended only to steal Willie's money, with the situation escalating into murder after resistance or confrontation. On the surface, the missing money appeared consistent with such a scenario. However, detectives gradually questioned whether robbery alone adequately explained the exceptional violence of the crime. Willie had suffered repeated blunt force injuries before the fatal captive bolt pistol wound. His clothing had been removed. His body had been transported to another location. These actions suggested a level of brutality and effort that many investigators considered inconsistent with a straightforward robbery. While theft could not be completely excluded, it failed to account convincingly for every known fact. Consequently, Robbery remained another unproven possibility rather than an accepted explanation. For many years, the investigation appeared to reach little progress. Time passed, witnesses aged, memories faded, and hopes of solving the murder seemed increasingly remote. Yet Willie's family refused to abandon the search for answers. Among them, his brother Luca became the most determined advocate for reopening the investigation. Decades after the murder, his continued efforts contributed to renewed public attention and increasing pressure on authorities to reconsider the evidence using modern investigative methods. In 2014, more than 25 years after Willie's death, prosecutors officially reopened the case. The renewed investigation represented one of the most comprehensive efforts ever devoted to the murder. Advances in forensic science offered opportunities that had been unavailable in 1988. Willie's body was exhumed so that specialists could conduct new examinations using modern techniques. Investigators also undertook an extraordinary review of witness testimony. A total of 229 witnesses were questioned or re-examined. Detectives revisited statements collected decades earlier, comparing them with new interviews in search of inconsistencies, forgotten details, or previously overlooked connections. The scale of the renewed inquiry extended beyond witness interviews alone. Authorities analyzed more than 205,000 intercepted telephone conversations, representing approximately 300 hours of recorded communications. This enormous undertaking reflected investigators' belief that even decades after the crime, hidden relationships or overlooked remarks might still reveal valuable information. Every available lead was scrutinized in hopes that modern analytical methods could uncover what earlier investigations had missed. During this renewed examination, prosecutors also identified 8 individuals suspected of providing false information or misleading statements during the investigation. These developments reinforced a suspicion that had existed for years. Someone, or perhaps several people, might have concealed important information from investigators. Whether such conduct directly protected the killer or merely reflected confusion and rumor remains uncertain. Nevertheless, the possibility that false testimony had hindered the search for justice became an increasingly significant element of the case. Another unexpected development involved former priest Don Tiziano Bruscagen. His statements generated widespread public attention because he publicly claimed that he knew the identity of Willie's killer, as well as 2 alleged accomplices. Such an assertion naturally raised hopes that the decades-old mystery might finally be approaching resolution. However, those hopes soon encountered another obstacle. When pressed for further information, Bruscagen declined to reveal his source. He later explained that his knowledge was based not on direct evidence, but on rumors circulating within the local community, without identifiable sources or verifiable evidence. Investigators could not transform his claims into prosecutable facts. His statements therefore failed to identify a legally sustainable suspect. Authorities eventually investigated Bruscagen himself on allegations related to false accusations and misleading claims. Ultimately, an appellate court acquitted him of defamation-related accusations. Although his public statements briefly appeared to promise a breakthrough, they ultimately produced no evidence capable of resolving the murder. Yet another twist emerged in 2015 when Luca Branchi received an anonymous letter. Unlike generalized rumors, this letter specifically identified a man alleged to be responsible for Willie's death and included details that investigators reportedly considered sufficiently credible to warrant further attention. Even so, the anonymous nature of the communication presented an obvious difficulty. Without knowing the identity of the writer, investigators could not evaluate the source's credibility or question the individual further. The information, therefore, remained incomplete. Years later, during 2023 and 2024, Authorities continued publicly appealing for the author of the letter to come forward. Investigators expressed the belief that this unknown individual might possess what they described as the final missing piece capable of clarifying the truth behind Willie's murder. Whether that person will ever reveal themselves remains unknown. As decades passed, the investigation into Willie Branchey's death came to symbolize more than a single unsolved homicide. It illustrated how multiple small obstacles can accumulate until they become nearly impossible to overcome. A body left far from the true crime scene. Physical evidence lost before modern forensic methods existed. Witnesses whose memories changed over time. Statements suspected of being false. Rumors impossible to verify. Anonymous accusations without identifiable sources. Every development seemed to offer the possibility of progress while simultaneously introducing new uncertainty, rather than moving steadily toward resolution. The investigation repeatedly circled back to the same unanswered questions. Who was with Willie during his final hours? Was he actually killed? Why was such extraordinary violence used against an 18-year-old young man widely described as gentle and trusting? And perhaps most importantly, why has no one ever been held legally responsible? By the conclusion of the renewed investigation, authorities had unquestionably deepened their understanding of many aspects of the case. They had reconstructed timelines more carefully, re-examined witnesses, explored every major theory, and applied modern forensic methods wherever possible. Yet despite these remarkable efforts, the central mystery remained intact. The investigation had become larger, more detailed, and more exhaustive than ever before. But the identity of Willie Branchey's killer remained hidden, preserving the case's place among Italy's most enduring and heartbreaking unsolved crimes. For many criminal investigations, the conclusion arrives in a courtroom. Detectives identify a suspect, prosecutors present evidence, witnesses testify under oath, and judges or juries determine whether the evidence proves guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. The legal process may be lengthy and complex, but it ultimately provides an official answer to the central question of who committed the crime. The murder of Willie Branchey followed a very different path. Despite decades of investigation, repeated reviews of evidence, the examination of multiple theories, and the reopening of the case using modern investigative techniques, the judicial process never reached the stage that Willie's family had hoped for. There has never been a murder trial. No individual has ever been convicted for killing Willie Branchey. Legally, the case remains unresolved, and the identity of the person or persons responsible has never been established before a court of law. This absence of a trial does not reflect a lack of investigative effort. On the contrary, the Branchey case has been the subject of one of the most extensive long-term investigations associated with an Italian cold case. Prosecutors and investigators devoted years to re-examining witness testimony, reviewing physical evidence, testing old assumptions against modern forensic standards, and following new leads whenever they emerged. Yet criminal justice depends not only on suspicion or probability, but on evidence that can withstand legal scrutiny. However compelling an investigative theory may appear, it cannot become the basis for a conviction unless supported by reliable and admissible proof. Throughout the investigation, several individuals attracted the attention of detectives at different times. Some were questioned because they had reportedly been among the last people to see Willie alive. Others became significant because their names surfaced repeatedly during interviews or anonymous communications. Still others drew attention after making public claims regarding the identity of the killer. Yet in every instance, investigators encountered the same legal obstacle. Suspicion alone was insufficient. In criminal law, establishing guilt requires evidence capable of proving responsibility beyond a reasonable doubt. In Willie's case, that standard has never been met. One of the earliest individuals examined by investigators was Valeriano Forzati, because he was believed to have been among the last people to see Willie before his disappearance, and because of his criminal background. Investigators naturally considered him an important person of interest. He was questioned extensively during the early investigation. Nevertheless, despite the suspicions surrounding him, authorities were unable to gather physical evidence linking him directly to the murder. His statements and the available testimony did not provide prosecutors with a legally sustainable case. Consequently, no charges relating to Willie's death resulted from that line of investigation. Although Forzati later became associated with unrelated violent crimes and fled to Argentina, those later events did not establish his responsibility for the Branchi murder. The legal distinction remained clear. Being a suspect or attracting investigative attention does not constitute proof of guilt. As the years passed, attention shifted toward broader investigative theories rather than identifiable defendants. Prosecutors examined whether Willie might have been killed after witnessing a secret that someone wished to conceal. They explored the possibility that the crime was connected to clandestine homosexual meetings, reportedly occurring within the region during a period when such relationships were often hidden because of prevailing social attitudes. They also investigated whether a network involved in the abuse of minors might somehow have intersected with Willie's death. Each of these theories reflected investigative attempts to explain the available evidence, particularly the extraordinary brutality of the murder and the apparent effort to conceal aspects of the crime. Yet none of these hypotheses developed into prosecutable cases. No court has ever determined that any of these proposed motives accurately explains Willie's death. They remain investigative possibilities rather than judicial findings. The reopening of the investigation in 2014 represented perhaps the greatest opportunity to transform long-standing suspicion into legally admissible evidence. By then, forensic science had advanced dramatically beyond the capabilities available in 1988. Authorities exhumed Willie's body in the hope that modern examinations might reveal overlooked details. Investigators reviewed the testimony of 229 witnesses, analyzed more than 205,000 intercepted telephone conversations, and re-examined decades of investigative material. The renewed inquiry also identified 8 individuals suspected of providing false or misleading information during the investigation. Such findings suggested that important facts may have been concealed during earlier stages of the case. Even so, identifying inconsistencies in witness testimony did not automatically identify the killer. Courts require direct, credible, and legally admissible evidence connecting a specific individual to the commission of the crime. Despite the enormous scope of the renewed investigation, prosecutors were unable to assemble a body of evidence meeting that threshold. One of the most publicly discussed moments during the reopened investigation involved former priest Don Tiziano Bruscagin. His statements generated considerable attention because he publicly declared that he knew the identities of Willie's killer and 2 alleged accomplices. Such claims naturally raised hopes that decades of uncertainty might finally end. However, when authorities sought supporting evidence, the anticipated breakthrough failed to materialize. Bruscagin later explained that his information originated from rumors circulating within the community rather than first-hand knowledge or verifiable evidence. He declined to identify a source capable of being questioned by investigators. Without corroboration, his statements possessed little evidentiary value in criminal proceedings. Prosecutors eventually investigated him regarding allegations connected to false accusations, but an appellate court ultimately acquitted him. From a legal perspective, his involvement illustrates an important principle. Public claims, no matter how dramatic, cannot replace evidence. Courts require testimony supported by verifiable facts rather than community speculation. Consequently, Bruskagin's statements never produced charges against any murder suspect. Another significant development emerged in 2015, when Willie's brother Luka received an anonymous letter. Unlike generalized rumors, the letter reportedly identified a specific man and included details that investigators considered sufficiently credible to merit continued attention. Even so, anonymous communications present obvious legal limitations. Without knowing the identity of the author, investigators cannot evaluate credibility, examine possible motives, or subject the individual to questioning under oath. The anonymous letter, therefore, represented an investigative lead rather than admissible proof. Authorities continued to treat it seriously enough that, years later, they publicly appealed for the writer to come forward. Investigators expressed the belief that this unknown individual might possess information capable of resolving the case. Yet unless the author chooses to identify themselves and provide verifiable testimony, the contents of the letter alone remain insufficient for prosecution. The judicial outcome of Willie Branchi's case is therefore defined not by conviction, but by absence. No indictment has resulted in a murder trial. No court has weighed competing evidence regarding a defendant's responsibility for Willie's death. No verdict has established an official narrative explaining exactly what happened during the final hours of September 29th. 1988. Instead, the legal record reflects an investigation that has remained open to new evidence while repeatedly encountering the limitations imposed by missing proof. Deteriorated physical evidence, inconsistent testimony, and the passage of time. Such outcomes are among the most difficult realities within criminal justice. Investigators may sincerely believe that certain individuals possess knowledge they have never revealed. Families may remain convinced that someone within the community knows the truth. Journalists and researchers may identify persuasive patterns suggesting particular explanations. Yet none of these beliefs, regardless of how reasonable they may appear, can substitute for evidence presented according to the standards required by law. Criminal courts exist to determine legal responsibility, not to resolve every unanswered question. When evidence remains incomplete, courts cannot convict simply because uncertainty feels unsatisfying. The consequence is that some crimes remain officially unsolved despite years of dedicated investigative work. By the mid-2020s, Willie Branchi's murder continued to occupy precisely that difficult legal position. Prosecutors in Ferrara have continued reviewing newly available information and evaluating materials obtained during more recent investigative efforts. The case has not been formally closed in the sense that authorities have abandoned all possibility of future progress. Instead, it remains a cold case, an investigation without a judicial conclusion, but not without continuing hope. Every new witness, every previously overlooked document, every credible piece of evidence retains the potential, however small, to alter the legal landscape. Until such evidence emerges, however, the judicial record remains unchanged. Willie Branchi was murdered on September 29th or 30, 1988. His body was discovered beside the Po River. Investigators determined that he had been beaten repeatedly before being fatally wounded with a captive bolt pistol and that his body had almost certainly been transported from another location. Multiple investigative theories have been explored over the decades, and an extensive reinvestigation was conducted beginning in 2014. Yet despite all of these efforts, no individual has been found guilty in a court of law. The absence of a conviction does not diminish the certainty that a terrible crime occurred. It simply reflects the enduring challenge of transforming suspicion into proof. For Willie's family, the judicial process remains unfinished. For investigators, the the search for legally sufficient evidence continues. And for the Italian justice system, the murder of Willie Branchi remains one of its most enduring unresolved cases, waiting for the piece of evidence that has eluded authorities for nearly 4 decades. Nearly 4 decades have passed since the morning Willie Branchi's body was discovered beside the Po River. Yet the passage of time has not brought the certainty that so many hoped would eventually arrive. The years have changed the world around the investigation. Forensic science has advanced beyond what investigators in 1988 could have imagined. Entire generations have grown up in Goro. People who were children at the time of the murder have become adults, while many of those originally questioned have grown old. Some individuals connected to the investigation have died. Memories have inevitably faded, and the physical traces that once existed have become increasingly difficult to recover. Time, which often helps solve crimes through new technology or unexpected confessions, has also become one of the greatest adversaries in the search for justice for Willie Branchi. Yet despite these challenges, his name has never completely disappeared from public memory. Instead, it has become permanently associated with one of Italy's most haunting unsolved criminal investigations. The reasons extend beyond the brutality of the crime itself. Countless murders have shocked communities, but not all continue to command attention decades later. Willie's case endures because it combines extraordinary violence with extraordinary uncertainty. Investigators established beyond doubt that he had been beaten repeatedly, fatally wounded with a captive bolt pistol, stripped of his clothing, and left beside the Po River after being killed elsewhere. Those facts are clear. Almost everything necessary to explain why those events occurred remains unknown. This contrast between certainty and mystery has kept the case alive long after many other investigations have faded from public discussion. Throughout the years, one constant has remained: the determination of Willie's family. For them, the murder was never simply another cold case discussed in newspapers or documentaries. It was the loss of a son, a brother, and a young man whose future ended before adulthood had truly begun. Every anniversary represented another reminder that justice had not yet been achieved. Every public appeal carried the hope that someone who had remained silent might finally decide to speak. Among those who refused to abandon that hope was Willie's brother, Luca Branchi. Over the decades, Luca emerged as the family's most visible advocate in the continuing search for answers. While investigations slowed and public attention occasionally shifted elsewhere, he continued urging authorities not to let the case disappear. His persistence played a significant role in maintaining public awareness and contributed to the reopening of the investigation in 2014. For many families confronted with an unsolved homicide, time gradually erodes the expectation that the truth will ever emerge. Luca's actions reflected the opposite response. Rather than accepting uncertainty as inevitable, he consistently argued that unanswered questions deserved renewed investigation whenever new methods or new information became available. His determination illustrates one of the defining characteristics shared by many families affected by unresolved crimes. Even when official progress appears limited, hope often survives. It may become quieter, more cautious, and more realistic over the years, but it rarely disappears completely. The reopening of the investigation represented a moment when that hope briefly grew stronger. Modern forensic methods, renewed witness interviews, and extensive investigative resources suggested that the decades-old mystery might finally be approaching resolution. Authorities demonstrated an extraordinary commitment by reviewing hundreds of witness statements, analyzing more than 205,000 intercepted telephone conversations, exhuming Willie's body for renewed examination, and revisiting virtually every major theory that had emerged since 1988. Such efforts reflected an important principle within criminal justice. An investigation does not necessarily end simply because many years have passed. New technology can reveal details previously hidden, while changing circumstances sometimes encourage reluctant witnesses to cooperate. Even so, the renewed investigation also illustrated the limitations of modern science. Technology can examine evidence only if that evidence still exists. It cannot recreate physical traces that were lost decades earlier. It cannot restore memories exactly as they existed in 1988. It cannot identify the original crime scene when its location remains unknown. Although scientific advances have transformed criminal investigations around the world, they cannot overcome every obstacle created by time, incomplete evidence, or missing witnesses. In Willie's case, modern methods deepened investigators' understanding of certain aspects of the crime without providing the decisive breakthrough necessary to identify the killer beyond reasonable doubt. Another enduring aspect of the case has been the repeated emphasis placed on community silence. Throughout the investigation, authorities expressed concern that some witnesses had changed their accounts or failed to provide complete information. Later inquiries even identified individuals suspected of giving false or misleading statements. These developments contributed to a broader perception that someone, or perhaps several people, possessed knowledge that had never been fully shared with investigators. It is impossible to determine today why such silence may have existed. Fear, personal loyalty, uncertainty, damaged memories, or concern about social consequences could each have influenced individual decisions. The available evidence does not permit definitive conclusions regarding anyone's motives. Nevertheless, investigators repeatedly returned to the belief that the complete truth might still exist within the memories of people who lived in or around Goro during the late 1980s. This possibility continues to shape public appeals for information even today. One particularly striking example of the family's continuing efforts occurred in 2024. Recognizing that some individuals might hesitate to contact authorities directly, the Branchy family arranged for anonymous mailboxes to be placed at several locations. The purpose was simple yet powerful. Anyone possessing information about Willie's murder could provide it without immediately revealing their identity. This initiative reflected an understanding of the challenges that had confronted investigators for decades. If fear or reluctance had prevented someone from speaking openly in the past, perhaps anonymity could remove that barrier. Whether these efforts will eventually produce new evidence remains uncertain, but they demonstrate that the family's search for answers has not ended. Even after almost 40 years, they continue exploring every reasonable possibility that might encourage someone to come forward. The anonymous letter received by Luca Branchy in 2015 further illustrates why investigators continue, believing that additional information may still exist. Although the author has never identified themselves, authorities considered portions of the letter sufficiently credible to justify continued appeals for the writer to contact investigators. Public requests issued during 2023 and 2024 reflected the belief that this unknown individual could possess information unavailable from any other source. Whether the letter ultimately represents the long-sought breakthrough or simply another unresolved lead remains impossible to know. Yet its existence reinforces a central theme of the investigation: the possibility that the final answers may still rest with people who have never fully shared what they know. Willie Branchy's murder has also become a reminder of how criminal investigations are shaped by the historical period in which they occur. Had the crime happened decades later, investigators might have benefited from surveillance cameras, advanced DNA analysis, digital communication records, and forensic techniques unavailable in 1988. Instead, detectives confronted a homicide at a time when scientific resources were considerably more limited. Evidence preservation standards differed from those used today. DNA technology had not yet become a routine investigative tool. Once opportunities were lost during the earliest stages of the investigation, many could never be recreated. This reality should not be understood as criticism of individual investigators alone, but as recognition that every criminal investigation operates within the technological capabilities of its own era. The Branchi case demonstrates how the timing of a crime can profoundly influence the possibility of achieving justice. It also serves as a reminder of the importance of distinguishing between verified facts and enduring speculation. Over the decades, numerous theories have circulated regarding Willie's death. Some have focused on secrets he may have witnessed. Others have examined alleged clandestine meetings, possible abuse networks, or robbery as a motive. Each theory emerged because investigators believe it deserved examination based on available information. Yet none has ever been conclusively proven in court. As a result, the central mystery remains unresolved. Respect for both the victim and the integrity of the investigation requires acknowledging that uncertainty rather than replacing it with unsupported conclusions. In unsolved cases, the temptation to fill gaps with speculation can be powerful. The Branchi investigation demonstrates why restraint remains essential. Facts retain their value precisely because they're distinguished from possibilities. Ultimately, however, the legacy of Willie Branchi's case should not be measured solely by the mystery surrounding his death. It should also be remembered through the life that was taken. Before he became the subject of investigative files, newspaper headlines, and public debate, Willie was an 18-year-old young man living with his family in the fishing town of Goro. Those who knew him described him as polite, gentle, and trusting. His mild intellectual disability made him especially vulnerable to manipulation, but it never diminished his humanity or the value of his life. Behind every discussion of forensic evidence, investigative theory, and judicial procedure stands the simple reality that a family lost someone they loved. That truth has remained constant from September 1988 until today. The passage of nearly 4 decades has not diminished that loss. It has merely transformed immediate grief into an enduring search for answers. Cases like Willie Branchi's often leave 2 separate legacies. One belongs to criminal justice, reminding investigators, prosecutors, and forensic experts of the importance of preserving evidence, documenting witness testimony carefully, and remaining open to new investigative methods as technology evolves. The other legacy belongs to the families left behind. It is measured not in legal documents, but in birthdays that pass without celebration, anniversaries marked by unanswered questions, and years spent hoping that someone, somewhere, will finally provide the missing truth. The Branchi family has carried that burden for almost 40 years. Whether they will ever receive the certainty they seek remains unknown. Today, Willie Branchi's murder continues to be recognized as one of Italy's most significant cold cases. Not because investigators failed to care, nor because his family stopped searching, but because every confirmed fact has been shadowed by another unanswered question. A body abandoned beside a river. A murder committed somewhere else. Missing clothing that has never been recovered. Witnesses whose stories changed. Anonymous information that has never been fully explained. The extraordinary efforts undertaken during the reopened investigation demonstrate that authorities have not abandoned the pursuit of justice. Yet, justice remains incomplete until the truth can be established through evidence rather than speculation. Perhaps someone still remembers a conversation once dismissed as insignificant. Perhaps someone has remained silent out of fear, uncertainty, or loyalty. Perhaps the anonymous letter truly came from a person who knows what happened during Willie's final hours. Or perhaps the answers have already disappeared with the passing of time. The available evidence cannot tell us which possibility is correct. What it does tell us is that an 18-year-old young man left home on the evening of September 29th, 1988, expecting to return to the people who loved him. He never did. Nearly 4 decades later, his family continues to wait for the answers that every family deserves. Whether those answers will ever emerge remains one of the most enduring questions in modern Italian criminal history. Some murders remain unsolved, not because the violence is forgotten, but because the truth never fully reaches the courtroom. Whether that is what happened in Goro remains unknown. What is certain is that Willie Branchi's life ended far too soon, and the search for justice in his name continues. The story of Willie Branchi does not end with an arrest, a courtroom verdict, or a final chapter in a legal file. Instead, it ends where so many unresolved investigations continue to exist, in a space between certainty and uncertainty, between established fact and unanswered question. Nearly 4 decades have passed since the night an 18-year-old young man walked through the familiar streets of Goro, expecting, as he always had, to return home. The events that followed transformed an ordinary evening into one of the most enduring mysteries in modern Italian criminal history. Yet despite the passing years, despite renewed investigations, despite advances in forensic science, and despite countless hours devoted to examining every available lead, the central question remains exactly as it was in September 1988. Who killed Willie Branchi and why? Every confirmed fact in the case points toward a violent and deliberate crime. Willie was beaten repeatedly with tremendous force. His facial bones were fractured. His head suffered severe trauma. The fatal injury was inflicted with a captive bolt pistol, an instrument rarely encountered in homicide investigations. His body was left naked near the banks of the Po River after being moved from another location. His clothing disappeared and has never been recovered. These facts have never been seriously disputed. They are supported by the forensic evidence collected during the investigation. Yet surrounding those facts is an extraordinary absence of certainty. No witness has been able to describe the murder itself. No definitive crime scene has ever been identified. No physical evidence has conclusively linked a specific individual to the killing. The result is a case that appears simultaneously well documented and profoundly incomplete. For investigators, few situations are more frustrating than possessing certainty that a terrible crime occurred while lacking the evidence required to identify the person responsible. Throughout the decades, authorities repeatedly returned to the investigation with renewed determination. They questioned witnesses again. They re-examined physical evidence. They reconsidered theories that had once seemed exhausted. They applied scientific methods unavailable to investigators in 1988. Every significant development brought hope that the missing piece might finally emerge. Yet each apparent breakthrough eventually encountered the same obstacle. The available evidence remained insufficient to establish legal responsibility beyond reasonable doubt. In many ways, the Branchi investigation became not only a search for a killer, but also a demonstration of the limits of criminal investigation itself. Modern technology can illuminate old evidence, but it cannot recreate opportunities lost decades earlier. Witnesses can be questioned repeatedly, but memories rarely become clearer as time passes. Rumors may point investigators toward new possibilities. Yet rumors alone cannot become evidence inside a courtroom. Anonymous letters may contain valuable information, but without an identifiable author willing to testify, their usefulness remains limited. The Branchi case illustrates how even the most determined investigation can be constrained by circumstances beyond the control of investigators themselves. At the center of those circumstances lies the passage of time. Time has changed Goro. Streets have evolved. Businesses have changed. and generations have grown up knowing Willie's name, not because they knew him personally, but because they inherited the story of his unsolved murder. People who once gave statements as young adults are now elderly. Some individuals connected to the investigation are no longer alive. Others may no longer remember conversations that once seemed insignificant. Evidence that might have been recovered immediately after the crime may now be impossible to locate. Time is often described as an ally of justice because new technologies and changing loyalties sometimes encourage witnesses to speak. Yet time is equally capable of erasing details forever. Every unsolved homicide exists in a race against memory. And Willie Branchey's case has now been running that race for almost 40 years. Despite these realities, one element of the story has remained remarkably constant: the determination of Willie's family. Their search has never been driven by sensationalism or public attention. It has been driven by a simple desire shared by families everywhere: the desire to know what happened to someone they loved. For them, Willie has never been merely the victim in a famous cold case. He remains a son, a brother, and a young man whose life ended before it had truly begun. His absence has been measured not in headlines, but in birthdays never celebrated, family gatherings forever incomplete, and decades spent waiting for answers that have never arrived. Luca Branchey, in particular, has become the public face of that determination. Through years of uncertainty, he continued asking authorities not to forget the case. His persistence contributed to renewed investigations and kept public attention focused on the possibility that someone still possessed information capable of changing everything. Even after decades without a definitive breakthrough, he refused to accept silence as the final answer. In 2024, that commitment took another meaningful form when the family established anonymous mailboxes where members of the public could provide information without revealing their identities. The gesture carried an unmistakable message. If fear, embarrassment, uncertainty, or loyalty had prevented someone from speaking openly for years, perhaps another opportunity would finally encourage them to come forward. It reflected an understanding that justice sometimes depends not only on scientific evidence, but also on individual conscience. Whether those anonymous mailboxes will ultimately produce the information investigators have long sought remains unknown. Nevertheless, they symbolize something larger than the investigation itself. They represent the refusal to surrender hope completely, even after nearly 4 decades. The anonymous letter received by Luca in 2015 also continues to occupy a unique place within the story. Authorities publicly acknowledged that parts of its contents appeared sufficiently credible to warrant continued attention. Years later, investigators were still encouraging the unknown author to identify themselves, believing that this person might possess what they described as the final missing piece of the puzzle. Whether that belief proves justified is impossible to know. Perhaps the letter contains the key to solving the case. Perhaps it reflects only partial knowledge or secondhand information. Until the author chooses to speak openly, the truth remains inaccessible. Yet the letter serves as another reminder that investigators have never entirely abandoned the possibility that someone still knows what happened during Willie's final hours. The case has also become a powerful lesson about the importance of preserving evidence and conducting meticulous investigations from the earliest possible moment. Later reviews identified shortcomings in the original inquiry, including disturbances at the location where the body was discovered and limitations in evidence preservation that reflected the forensic standards of the era. These observations are not merely historical details. They illustrate how decisions made during the first hours of a homicide investigation can influence the search for justice decades later. Every missing trace, every contaminated scene, every overlooked detail has the potential to become an obstacle that no future technological advancement can completely overcome. The reopening of the investigation demonstrated that modern science can provide remarkable new opportunities. But it also confirmed that some opportunities, once lost, cannot be recreated. Another enduring lesson concerns the distinction between theory and proof. Over the years, investigators examined numerous possible motives. They explored the possibility that Willie witnessed something he should not have seen. They investigated suggestions involving secret meetings, potential abuse networks, and robbery. Each direction reflected a genuine effort to understand the evidence rather than a conclusion already reached. Yet none of those theories has ever been confirmed in court. This distinction matters. Criminal investigations frequently involve exploring possibilities that ultimately prove incorrect or remain forever unresolved. Respecting that distinction protects both the integrity of the investigation and the memory of the victim. It prevents speculation from replacing evidence and ensures that the search for truth remains grounded in verifiable facts rather than assumption. That commitment to factual accuracy is especially important in a case as emotionally powerful as Willie Branchi's. The brutality of the murder naturally invites speculation. Human beings seek explanations, particularly when confronted with acts of extraordinary violence. Yet the absence of definitive answers does not justify inventing them. Perhaps the greatest respect that can be shown to Willie and his family is the willingness to acknowledge what is known while honestly admitting what remains uncertain. The truth does not become stronger when unsupported conclusions are added to it. Instead, it becomes more valuable when uncertainty is recognized rather than concealed. Beyond the legal questions and investigative theories lies a simpler story that should never be forgotten. Before becoming the subject of police reports and newspaper articles, Willie was simply a young man living in a small fishing town. Those who knew him remembered him as gentle, polite, and trusting. His mild intellectual disability made him especially vulnerable, but did not define his worth or his humanity. He lived within a close family, followed familiar routines, and expected to return home after an ordinary evening. That expectation was shared by everyone who loved him. It was never fulfilled. Everything that followed, the investigations, the theories, the reopened case, the anonymous letter, the public appeals, exists because that ordinary expectation was shattered by an act of extraordinary violence. Today, Willie Branchi's murder continues to occupy a unique place in Italian criminal history. It is remembered not because investigators stopped searching, nor because the public lost interest, but because the case continues to challenge the very idea that every crime eventually finds its resolution. Some investigations remain suspended between the known and the unknown for years or even generations. They become reminders that justice is not guaranteed simply because investigators work diligently or because families refuse to give up hope. Sometimes the decisive piece of evidence never appears. Sometimes it exists but remains hidden behind silence. Sometimes only the person responsible truly knows what happened. Whether Willie Branchi's case will one day be solved remains impossible to predict. Perhaps a forgotten memory will surface. Perhaps someone who has remained silent for decades will finally decide that the burden of secrecy has become too great. Perhaps new evidence, overlooked for years, will eventually reveal what investigators have long sought. Or perhaps the mystery will remain unresolved, becoming one of those rare cases in which history preserves the questions but never discovers the answers. The evidence available today cannot tell us which future awaits. What it can tell us is something far simpler and far more certain. On September 29, 1988, an 18-year-old named Willie Branchi left home in the town of Goro. By the following morning, his life had been violently taken from him. The people responsible have never been identified in a court of law. His family has continued searching for the truth for nearly 40 years. Investigators have continued examining every credible lead available to them. And somewhere within the quiet streets of Goro, beside the waters of the Po River where the investigation began, the unanswered questions remain. Until those questions receive answers supported by evidence rather than speculation. Willie Branchey's story will continue to stand as both a tragedy and a reminder that behind every unsolved case is not merely a mystery, but a human life interrupted, a family forever changed, and a search for justice that refuses to end. There are some cases that remain in public memory, not because they have reached a conclusion, but because they never truly found one. The murder of Vilfredo Luciano Willie Branchey belongs to that rare category of investigations that continue to exist in the space between tragedy and uncertainty. Almost 40 years have passed since the young man from Goro disappeared during an ordinary evening and was found dead the following morning beside the Po River. In that time, investigators have changed, technology has advanced, witnesses have aged, and society itself has transformed. Yet the fundamental questions surrounding Willie's death remain unanswered. The identity of the person or persons responsible has never been established. The motive has never been proven. The true location where the crime occurred has never been confirmed. And for Willie's family, the absence of these answers has meant living with a wound that never completely closes. The case remains a reminder that some investigations are not defined by what authorities discover, but by what remains just beyond reach. The facts of Willie's final hours are limited but powerful. On September 29, 1988, Willie left home as he had done many times before. He was an 18-year-old young man living in a small fishing community where familiar faces surrounded him. He was known as someone gentle and trusting, a person who did not easily recognize danger and who could be influenced by others because of his mild intellectual disability. That vulnerability was part of what made him loved by those close to him, but it also made the circumstances of his disappearance even more painful. The last confirmed moments of his life came when he was seen at a local pizza restaurant in the company of several men from the area. After that, the known timeline ends. Somewhere between those final sightings and the discovery of his body, something happened that has remained hidden from investigators for decades. The next morning, Willie was found dead near the Po River. The condition of his body revealed the extreme violence he had suffered. He had been beaten repeatedly, particularly around the head and face. The injuries showed that the attack had been brutal and prolonged. The fatal wound came from a captive bolt pistol, a tool normally associated with livestock slaughter rather than criminal violence against another human being. His clothing was missing, and it has never been recovered. The location where his body was discovered was determined not to be the original crime scene, meaning Willie had almost certainly been killed elsewhere and then transported. These facts created the foundation of the investigation, but they also created the mystery that continues today. Every answer led to another question. If Willie was killed somewhere else, where did that happen? If someone moved his body, who had the ability and opportunity to do so, why was his clothing removed? Why was such an unusual weapon chosen? Why did someone decide that an 18-year-old young man had to die? These questions have shaped the investigation for decades. Some cases remain unsolved because investigators never find a suspect. The Branchey case is different. Over the years, investigators examined individuals, theories, and possible motives. They did not simply abandon the case. They repeatedly returned to it, searching for connections that might have been overlooked. They investigated people who were believed to have been close to Willie before his death. They examined claims made by witnesses. They explored different explanations for why the murder occurred. Yet each possible path eventually encountered the same barrier: a lack of evidence strong enough to establish the truth in a court of law. One of the most difficult aspects of the case has been the difference between suspicion and proof. In a crime as shocking as Willie's murder, people naturally seek explanations. They want to understand how such violence could happen in a small community where people believed they knew one another. Over the years, several theories emerged. Some investigators considered whether Willie might have discovered a secret that placed him in danger. Others examined possible connections to private meetings that may have existed in the area during a period when certain relationships were often hidden because of social attitudes. Authorities also explored whether there could have been a connection to possible abuse networks. Another possibility considered was robbery, particularly because Willie was reportedly carrying money before his disappearance, and his belongings were missing afterward. Each theory was examined because investigators had a responsibility to consider every reasonable possibility. However, none of these explanations has ever been proven. No court has determined that any of them represents the actual reason Willie was killed. The distinction between possibility and fact has remained one of the most important elements of this case. The reopening of the investigation in 2014 represented a new chapter in the search for answers. For the first time, investigators could examine the case using tools that did not exist when Willie was murdered. His body was exhumed for modern forensic examination. Hundreds of witnesses were reviewed. More than 205,000 intercepted conversations were analyzed. Investigators examined whether some individuals had provided false or misleading information during earlier inquiries. These efforts demonstrated that the passage of time had not erased the commitment to finding the truth. Yet the renewed investigation also showed how difficult it is to solve a crime that has remained unresolved for decades. Modern technology can examine evidence, but only when evidence still exists. Investigators can question witnesses, but they cannot restore memories exactly as they were in 1988. They can follow new leads, but they cannot force hidden knowledge into the open. The case continued to resist resolution. Among the most significant later developments was the involvement of former priest Don Tiziano Bruscagen. His claims attracted attention because he stated that he knew the identity of Willie's killer and two alleged accomplices. For a moment, it appeared that the mystery might finally be approaching an answer. However, when investigators sought the source and evidence behind those claims, the situation became uncertain. Bruscagen acknowledged that the information was based on rumors circulating within the community, rather than direct knowledge, without a verifiable source or evidence that could be tested. His statements could not produce a legal conclusion. Although he was later acquitted of accusations related to defamation, his claims did not resolve the case. Another unresolved element remains the anonymous letter received by Willie's brother Luca in 2015. The letter identified a specific person and included details that investigators considered significant enough to continue examining. Years later, authorities continued appealing for the author to come forward because they believed that this person might possess important information. Yet anonymity created the same challenge faced throughout the investigation. Information cannot fully become evidence until the source is known and can be questioned. The letter remains one more unanswered piece within a case already filled with unanswered pieces. Through all these developments, one person has remained at the center of the search for justice: Luca Branchi. His continued efforts represent the enduring impact of unresolved crime on families. For investigators, a cold case is a file that remains open. For a family, it is an absence that continues every day. The passage of time may change how society remembers a victim, but does not change the reality experienced by those closest to them. Luca's efforts to keep Willie's case alive demonstrate that justice is not only about punishment. It is also about recognition, the recognition that a person's life mattered and that the truth surrounding their death deserves to be known. The anonymous mailboxes established by the family in 2024 reflected that ongoing commitment. They created another possible path for information to reach investigators without forcing individuals to immediately reveal their identities. Whether this effort will lead to new evidence remains unknown. But the action itself carries an important message. The search has not ended. Even after decades, there is still a belief that someone may know something that has never been shared. The story of Willie Branchey also raises broader questions about how communities respond when terrible crimes occur among them. Small communities often create a sense of familiarity and protection, but they can also make investigations more complicated. Relationships, reputations, and social connections may influence whether people speak openly. In Willie's case, investigators repeatedly confronted questions about whether some individuals knew more than they revealed. However, the exact reasons behind any silence remain unknown. It is important not to replace uncertainty with accusation. The truth must come from evidence, not assumption. Perhaps the most important lesson from Willie's case is that behind every investigation there is a person whose life existed before the crime. Over time, true crime stories often become focused on suspects, theories, and unanswered mysteries. Yet the victim can sometimes become lost beneath the investigation itself. Willie Branchey should be remembered first as a young man, not only as the victim of an unsolved murder. He was someone's son and brother. He was part of family. He had routines, relationships, and a place within his community. The tragedy of his death is not only that a crime remains unsolved, but that a life with its own possibilities was taken away. Today, the murder of Willie Branchey continues to stand as one of Italy's most haunting cold cases. It represents the painful reality that some families must continue searching long after the world has moved on. It represents the challenges faced by investigators when evidence disappears and memories fade. It represents the difference between knowing that a crime occurred and being able to prove who committed it. But above all, it represents a young man whose story remains unfinished. The final chapter of Willie's case has not yet been written. Perhaps one day, someone will come forward with information that changes everything. Perhaps new evidence will emerge. Perhaps the unanswered questions will finally receive answers. Until then, the truth remains somewhere between the evidence already discovered and the secrets that have never been revealed. What remains certain is that Willie Branchey's life mattered. His death was not forgotten. His family's search continues. And the hope for justice, even after nearly 4 decades, remains alive.